A simple stroll with my dog turned into a nightmare when three men decided I was an easy target. What they didn't realize was that my dog, Baxter, wasn't merely a pet. He was their worst nightmare. They believed they could escape, but the conclusion of this story imparted a lesson they'll never forget. Let's start from the beginning. My name is Clara Jenkins. At 67 years old, I've resided in this neighborhood long enough to discern when something feels amiss. Typically, it's a calm area, away from the chaos of the city. But at times, quiet can be deceiving. Every evening around 10 p.m., I take my dog Baxter out for a walk. It's our little ritual, just him, me, and the cool night air. Baxter isn't just any dog. He's a German Shepherd, large enough to intimidate anyone unfamiliar with him and clever enough to outsmart most people who are. His true uniqueness stems from his history as a former police K-9. He retired after years of service due to an injury, and I was fortunate enough to bring him home. He's not only my companion, he's my shadow, my protector. That night felt no different until I rounded a corner and spotted three men standing under a flickering streetlight, their silhouettes stretching across the pavement. Something in their posture, the way they huddled together, twisted my stomach. Baxter sensed it too, his ears perked up and a low growl escaped his throat. One of the men spotted us and smirked, nudging his friend. "Hey, look at that," he called out in a mocking tone. "Grandma's out for a walk with her big bad wolf." The other two laughed, their voices echoing through the still night air. "Yeah, maybe she's training him to fetch her groceries," another chimed in, his laughter sharp and mean. Baxter moved closer to me, his body tense, his growl escalating in volume, a clear warning as they began to approach us. My heart raced, and panic tried to claw at me, but I pushed it aside. I'd survived enough to learn that fear is akin to blood for sharks. It only emboldens them. The tallest of the three tilted his head, his smirk widening. "Relax, lady," he said, hands raised in mock innocence. "We're just saying hello. No need for the guard dog act." But I knew better, and so did Baxter. His growl shifted to a bark, sharp and commanding, as if challenging them to come closer. That's when I realized this wasn't just harmless teasing. The men bore a different kind of intent in their eyes. I tightened my grip on Baxter's leash and steeled myself. Whatever their plan was, they had no idea what was about to confront them. One of the men reached into his pocket and pulled out a metallic object. The streetlight caught it, causing it to gleam in a way that sent a chill down my spine. It looked sharp, like something you'd use in a kitchen, but definitely not for cooking. "Don't worry, Grandma," he said with a grin that made my skin crawl. "This will be over before you even blink." My breath hitched, but I refused to allow them to see fear on my face. My legs, however, didn't get the memo and began to tremble. Yet I planted my feet, determined to stand my ground. Baxter, on the other hand, remained unfazed. His growl intensified, deep and resonant, vibrating through the air. His fur bristled, and he stepped forward, placing himself firmly between me and the men. The tall one chuckled, nudging his friend. "What's this mutt gonna do, huh? Bark us to death?" Baxter responded with a sharp bark, resonating through the empty street. It wasn't the bark of an ordinary dog. It was a warning, a challenge. The shortest guy, who had been silent until then, shrugged. "Let's just show her who's in charge and be done with it." They appeared to believe this was a game. Baxter barked again, louder this time, taking another deliberate step forward, as if sizing them up, assessing who to take down first. "All right, Grandma," the tall one said, stepping closer. "Call off your dog." He didn't get to finish that sentence as Baxter lunged forward, stopping just short of him, teeth bared, growling like thunder. The guy jumped back, hands raised. "Whoa, whoa, okay, chill out, mutt." But Baxter was not chilling. He was locked in, ready to defend me at all costs. I tightened my grip on his leash, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "Baxter doesn't back down," I said, staring them down. "So unless you want to find out what happens next, I'd suggest you rethink your life choices." They had no clue who Baxter truly was, but they were about to learn. The man wielding the sharp object took a step closer, his grin replaced by an ugly glare. He raised it into the air, attempting to prove a point, aiming it at Baxter. "Let's see how tough your dog really is," he snarled, stepping forward. Big mistake. Before he could make his move, Baxter shot forward like lightning, jaws snapping onto the man's arm with precision. It wasn't a random attack. It was calculated and intentional. The kind of maneuver that screamed, "I've been trained for this!" The man screamed, shattering the eerie silence of the street. "Get this crazy dog off me!" he hollered, his voice cracking as he fought to shake Baxter off. Spoiler alert, Baxter wasn't letting go. The other two men froze momentarily, their bravado melting into wide-eyed panic. "What the heck is wrong with this dog?" one stammered, a mix of shock and disbelief in his voice. Still gripping the first guy's arm, Baxter gave a sharp tug, yanking him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. The metallic object skittered across the pavement, forgotten as the man writhed, trying to liberate himself. "Get off me!" he yelled again, his tone increasingly desperate. The taller one snapped out of his stupor, rushing forward. "We've got to take him down!" he shouted, seizing a chunk of wood from the ground. The third guy hesitated, clearly second-guessing his choices, but eventually followed, murmuring under his breath, "This dog's not normal." They came at us together, their movements frantic, but Baxter didn't even flinch, his body tensed, focus razor-sharp. "Baxter, watch out!" I yelled, stepping back as one of them swung the wooden piece at him. Baxter sidestepped the swing effortlessly, releasing his hold on the first man's arm and directing his attention toward the taller one who now faced him with a deep growl. He lunged, knocking the man backward like a linebacker on a tackle. The guy hit the ground with a loud thud, gasping as Baxter stood over him, teeth bared, challenging him to try anything else. Okay, I get it," the man stuttered, holding up his hands in surrender. The third guy didn't even attempt to step in. He just stood there, wide-eyed, rethinking every decision that had brought him to this moment. "This isn't just some dog," he murmured, shaking, and he was absolutely correct. Baxter was not just any dog. He was a former officer, trained to deal with situations exactly like this. But the fight wasn't finished yet. These guys weren't ready to back down. Not just yet, and Baxter had more to show them about true strength. It happened swiftly. The other two snapped out of their indecision and lunged at us. One grabbed a rusty metal pipe lying on the ground and swung it with all his might. "Stay back!" I shouted, panic creeping into my voice. But Baxter was well prepared. He dodged the swing as if it were nothing, moving quickly and precisely. The man stumbled forward, losing his balance from the force of his own swing. Baxter seized the moment, barking sharply and leaping forward, causing the man to drop the pipe. "Are you kidding me?" he yelled, his voice cracking as he retreated, his confidence clearly shaken. Meanwhile, the third guy attempted to be clever, sneaking up behind me. Big mistake. I felt a tug on my shoulder and turned just in time to see him reaching for me. My heart raced, but instead of freezing, I gripped my handbag tightly and swung it with all my strength. The bag connected with a solid thunk right on the side of his head. "Don't even think about it, buddy," I snapped, adrenaline coursing through me. The guy stumbled back, clutching his head. "What the heck, lady?" he shouted, looking more offended than hurt. Meanwhile, Baxter dealt with the man wielding the pipe. After disarming him, Baxter lunged, knocking him flat on his back with a force that seemed impossible for a dog. The man yelped as he hit the pavement, and Baxter stood over him, teeth bared, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Get it off me! Help me!" the guy wailed, his tough guy persona completely shattered. The third guy, still rubbing his head, glanced between me and Baxter, his face pale. "This is insane," he muttered, taking a step back. "Oh, you're just figuring that out now?" I replied, gripping my bag like a weapon. The guy on the ground squirmed beneath Baxter, his tone rising in desperation. "Call it off, please. I'm done." Baxter didn't budge, his eyes locked on the man like a hawk watching its prey. He wasn't attacking. He was merely demonstrating who was in charge. "Baxter, stay," I commanded firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Knife. The two remaining men exchanged glances, clearly questioning every decision they'd made up to that point. For a brief moment, everything was still. But I knew this was not over. Not yet. The chaos seemed to reach a boiling point. Baxter had one man pinned to the ground, another was staggering back after my handbag's not-so-gentle reminder to stay away. And the third, he was finished. He turned and bolted as if his shoes were ablaze. For a second, I considered letting him go, but Baxter, oh no. Baxter wasn't about to let the fun stop that easily. In a flash, he was off, akin to a heat-seeking missile locking onto its target. The man barely made it 10 steps before Baxter intercepted him, standing in his path like an unmovable force. The man froze, hands shooting into the air as if he were at a surprise police checkpoint. Okay, I give up," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Just call off the dog, please." Baxter remained steadfast, staring the man down, his tail stiff, his whole body conveying, "You're not going anywhere, pal." Meanwhile, I pulled out my phone, hands shaking a little less now that I had the upper hand. I dialed the police, keeping one eye on the two guys still within Baxter's growling range. "Yes, I need officers at Parkside Avenue," I stated, my voice steady. 3 men attempted to attack me, but my dog stopped them. "They're still here." One of the guys groaned from the ground. "Stop us, lady! Your dog's a maniac." I glanced down at him, raising an eyebrow. "Maniac? No, sweetheart, that's just years of training. The third guy, still standing with his hands up, let out a frustrated sigh. This is all your fault, Grandma. If you just... I cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice through his whining. My fault? I asked, sarcasm dripping from my tone. No, this is what happens when three grown men think it's a great idea to mess with a 67-year-old woman walking her dog. This isn't on me. It's on your poor decision-making skills. Baxter let out a single bark, as if to affirm my words. The guy on the ground groaned again, clearly realizing he wasn't going anywhere soon. Can't you just let us go? We learned our lesson, I swear. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Let me think about that. No. As the sound of sirens approached in the distance, I crossed my arms, looking at the trio of them. You've messed with the wrong grandma, I said, smiling just enough to drive the point home. Baxter stood tall, his gaze never leaving the man before him, as if to say, "Game over, boys." The wail of sirens grew closer, and within moments, two patrol cars arrived, lights flashing and casting a red and blue glow across the street. The three men looked like they'd just encountered their worst nightmare, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely inaccurate. The first officer stepped out, scanning the scene, with his eyes landing on Baxter, still guarding the ringleader. For a second, his professional demeanor slipped, and he chuckled. "No way, is that Baxter?" he said, voice filled with genuine surprise. Baxter turned to him, tail wagging ever so slightly, as if to say, "Yeah, it's me. What took you so long?" "You know my dog?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. The officer grinned, kneeling to get a better look at Baxter. "Know him. I worked with this guy back when he was on the force. Best K-9 we ever had. Took down more suspects than half the precinct combined." The younger second officer stared at Baxter as if he were looking at a legend. "Wait, this is the Baxter from the training videos?" "That's the one," the first officer said, shaking his head in disbelief. Meanwhile, the men on the ground protested. "This is ridiculous. We weren't doing anything wrong," one yelled, trying to scramble to his feet. Baxter emitted a sharp bark, freezing the guy mid-motion. He dropped back onto the pavement as though he just remembered who was in charge. "Right," the officer said, pulling out his notepad. "And your buddy just happened to be waving around a sharp object for fun?" "I wasn't going to use it," the man stammered, voice cracking. "It was just, for show." The second officer pointed to a security camera mounted on a nearby building. "Well, let's see what the footage has to say about that." I couldn't help but smirk as the men exchanged panicked glances. They were toast, and they knew it. As the officers cuffed the men and began loading them into the patrol cars, the first officer turned back to me. "Ma'am, I must say you and Baxter handled yourselves better than most people would have. If it weren't for you two, this could have ended much worse." I shrugged and gave Baxter a quick pat on the head. "Well, I wasn't exactly alone, was I? He's the real hero here." The officer smiled, shaking his head again. It's funny. So even back in the day, Baxter always seemed to know who the bad guys were. Guess that hasn't changed." As they drove away with the three troublemakers in tow, I felt a strange mix of relief and pride. My Baxter wasn't just any dog. He was a protector, a partner, and apparently still a bit of a legend. "Come on, buddy," I said, tugging lightly on his leash. "Let's go home." With that, we left the flashing lights behind, ready to put the chaos of the night behind us. By the next morning, it felt like the entire neighborhood and half the city had heard about what happened. Local news outlets buzzed with headlines like "Senior Citizen and Her Hero Dog Take Down Would-Be Attackers" and "XK9 Officer Saves the Day." I hadn't anticipated all this attention, but apparently, the police officer's account of the incident had spread like wildfire. Once people learned about Baxter's past as a police dog, it was as if the story wrote itself. Before I'd even finished my morning coffee, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to discover a small army of reporters and camera crews camped out on my front lawn. "Miss Jenkins, can we get a statement?" one of them called, shoving a microphone in my direction. Another chimed in, "How does it feel to have a dog that's being called a local hero?" Baxter, ever the professional, stood tall beside me, ears perked up as if ready for his close-up. I adjusted my robe, trying to appear calm and collected despite the chaos. "Well," I said, glancing down at Baxter, "I'd say I'm feeling a lot better than those three fools from last night." The reporters chuckled, scribbling notes and snapping photos of Baxter, who looked like he fully understood what was happening. "Miss Jenkins," one asked, "what would you say to people calling Baxter a hero?" I smirked. "I'd say they're absolutely right, but let's be honest. He's just doing what he's always done, protecting people and taking care of business. That's just who he is." The attention didn't end there. Throughout the day, deliveries began arriving at my door. Dog treats, chew toys, even handwritten thank you notes from strangers. One package contained a shiny new collar with a tag that read, Baxter the Brave. "You're famous now, buddy," I said, holding up the collar for him to see. His tail wagged, but he maintained that calm, stoic demeanor, as if to say, "Bah, yeah, I know I've earned it." Later that afternoon, a neighbor stopped by with her young daughter, who shyly handed me a crayon drawing of Baxter standing under a superhero cape. "Thank you for keeping our neighborhood safe," the little girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. Baxter leaned down to nuzzle her hand, and I felt my heart swell. "That's what we're here for," I said, giving Baxter a scratch behind the ears. By the time the sun set, the reporters had finally packed up, and the house returned to its usual quiet. I sat on the couch with Baxter at my side, scrolling through social media posts about our little adventure. The comments varied from, "What a legend," to, "Can we get a Baxter statue in the park?" "Not bad for a retired officer, huh?" I said, leaning down to kiss the top of his head. He gave me a look that said, "Just another day at the office." Justice had been served, and Baxter, he'd earned himself a well-deserved nap. A few weeks later, I was walking Baxter along our usual route when something caught my eye at the corner where it all began, a shiny new plaque mounted on a post. It read, "Here, Baxter the hero dog protected his owner Clara Jenkins with bravery and loyalty." I paused, staring at it for a moment before looking down at Baxter, whose ears perked up as he sniffed the air, completely unaware of his newfound celebrity status. "Well, would you look at that, buddy?" I said, crouching down to ruffle his fur. "They gave you your very own sign. Guess you're officially a big deal now." Baxter wagged his tail, giving me a look that said, "Told you I was special." The neighborhood felt a bit different now, safer and more connected. People would wave as we passed by, and a few kids even ran up to pet Baxter, calling him Super Dog or the Legend. As for me, life pretty much returned to normal. I still walked Baxter every night and still enjoyed my coffee on the porch in the mornings. But that night lingered with me, not only because of the events that occurred, but because of what it revealed about courage. Courage isn't solely about being strong or fearless. It's about trusting those who stand by your side. It's about recognizing that you don't have to face challenges alone. As for those three men, let's just say I hope they received the message loud and clear. Never mess with Clara Jenkins and her dog. As we walked home, I glanced back at the plaque one more time, smiling to myself. Baxter trotted beside me, calm and confident, prepared for whatever life had in store next. Because if there's one thing I learned from that night, it's that sometimes the most significant lessons come from the most unexpected heroes. In this story, Baxter was the hero we all needed. This tale serves as a reminder of the power of courage, honesty, and standing up for what's right. It's a testament to how loyalty and bravery, whether from a person or a cherished dog, can truly make a difference in the world. Let this be a lesson. Kindness and justice always prevail. And even in tough situations, doing the right thing leads to the best outcomes. Baxter's story isn't just about heroism. It's about the strength of trust, teamwork, and the belief that good will always triumph over evil. Stay kind, stay brave, and never forget that justice always wins.